So, fourth piece from Canícula that I chose is Christmas on page 133. And she starts off this one just by saying how, like, Christmas past haunts her every December. And she starts going through and, like, listing a bunch of different Christmas, like, scenarios that have happened. So, for example, she says, that year, we all got 2 gifts. Many other years, when we were laid off poor, there were no gifts. The year when we didn't have a tree until the very last day of school, when I won my classroom's tree. The year we didn't have a tree at all until I went and decorated a mesquite branch. I don't know if I'm pronouncing mesquite right, but a tree branch, I'm assuming. And then she starts listing how, like, some years they made gifts, and some years it took a lot of work to have to actually, like, buy presents if they wanted to. And she starts explaining how she saved pennies from milk money, and she tried really hard not to speak Spanish because then she would get, like, fined for speaking Spanish, and then all of her hard work of saving pennies would be gone. So a big reason that I picked this piece is just because Christmas is such a, like, multicultural holiday. So I was just interested in seeing her experiences with it. And I think one thing that really spoke out to me and what I took from this is it shows the, like, how their financial availability is subject to fluctuation, and that in turn shows, like, just job instability for their family, and so it's kind of like each year for the children, Christmas is kind of an indicator for how their family is doing financially, and then just with all of, like, the hard work of, like, just scraping together, like, however many, like, cents they could find to, like, actually buy presents because they wanted to, and that, like, giving spirit, it reminds me of how we've talked about that Mexican culture of just, like, giving the shirt off your back for other people even when you have nothing, and I think that's really admirable. And the last piece from Canícula that I selected is called The Fire on page 146. And she starts explaining how there's this house fire that got started by a lightning bolt. And let me find that quote. She excuse me. She starts explaining how Bueli covered all the mirrors with white sheets, unplugged the radio, the iron, the lamps. As soon as she heard thunder, she checked every plug in the house that might draw the deadly bolts from the sky, which is just never something that had crossed my mind before, that you would need to unplug things in your home for lightning. Like, I don't know, I've just never experienced, like, that type of vulnerability, and so that stood out to me a lot. And so she goes on to explain, I had nightmares of fire and of burning babies. In one, a rag doll, blonde on one side and black on the flip side, became my brother and had caught on fire. I woke up screaming next to Bueli in her cot. She hushed me. Amid sobbing, I told her what I'd seen. She led me to the crib where my brother laid. See, he's okay. And here's your doll. It's okay, too. You just had a pesadilla. The next day, she and Mommy agreed I needed to be healed de susto. And so this concept of being healed de susto, I was unfamiliar, but the next piece is actually called Susto on page 147. And so I read that one as well, and she's essentially explaining how she sees Bueli screaming and crying in pain because her mom accidentally put in vitamin drops in her eyes instead of her real eye drops. And so just seeing, not knowing why Bueli was in pain, but just seeing her, like, in pain and screaming and so frightened really affected her as well. And so she ends up getting physically ill, as well as, like, this emotional, like, terror that she's experiencing. And so the piece, she gets feverish and jaundiced, and she stops eating, and then she ends up going to the doctor. And what really stuck out to me was just She says, even after the long bus trips to get the shots and more trips to the doctor's office with the calendar with the print of the Indian woman cradling a sick child, even after all that, I still didn't want to eat and grew thinner. So as a nursing student in particular, the story about her having to like bus for so long just to get to the doctor really resonated, because we discussed that a lot, and how healthcare availability is so widespread, and there's such a range of like how people are able to access healthcare and their understanding of the healthcare system in general, which in the United States we have a very complex healthcare system, and there's a lot of loopholes, and if you don't know how to best handle it, then you're kind of screwed, and it's awful. And so I think that a huge factor for like why she wasn't able to like get the care that she really needed is we have historically all of the studies and experiments that are done to make medical discoveries, they're focused on middle-aged white men. The middle-aged white man is considered the average person, right? So everything should apply. If it applies to them, it should apply to everyone. But no, of course not. But that means that our standards of care are most applicable to middle-aged white men. And for example, then what might be the best approach to treat that person is not going to be the best approach to treat someone, for example, like a woman of color who's culturally very different than what this white average person in America would be. So just something from my discipline that relates and is very disappointing. And so, as I'm sure you guys are thinking, when, the middle-aged white man in America is not the average person, that is the most privileged person. And so the fact that we have historically centered healthcare to apply most to them is just contributing to their privilege. And, I just want to add, like, we don't just do like studies, of course, on middle-aged white men anymore, but it's all those historical practices that have been carried into present-day standards of healthcare that they still slip through the cracks, like we still don't have very individualized care for each individual person, no matter what their background is or their culture or anything like that, and that really needs to change.